It is past, guys, so you've been good enough to be here on time. I shall make a start. Well, good morning and a very warm welcome to these sessions about ISI inspections, which we hope you'll find useful and enjoyable, and most importantly, will have a positive effect on your inspection outcomes. Now, this morning, we're a select band of mostly prep and junior schools, but I do know that many of you have EYFS sections in your schools. Would you give me a thumbs up in the reactions box at the bottom of your screen if you have borders? Can we just check if anyone has borders? Landa, thank you very much indeed. Okay, feel free to use those reactions buttons as we go along so that I know you're still there from time to time. We've got lots of opportunities built in for questions as we go, so please put those in the chat. Otherwise, could I ask you to stay on mute if you wouldn't mind, other than that? Just a reminder, I sent through a couple of documents a little earlier along with the meeting link. And again, if you could have those handy, that would be really, really useful. I know some of you already, but let me introduce you to Paul Lunn, who's working with me this morning. Paul has over 20 years of experience being part of teams inspecting for the most prestigious schools in the country. He retired from teaching last year after serving as Senior Deputy Head at the Grammar School at Leeds, where, amongst other roles, he had responsibility for coordinating the school's inspection efforts for a good number of years. And the school consistently earned top inspection grades, and that was in no small part down to Paul's view of the big picture and what needed to be done at all stages. And he's going to share some of that wisdom with you today and tomorrow. So thanks, Paul, for joining us this morning.
That's not a problem. I think you've overstated my role there because it's all down to actually a collegiate effort, Robert. But thank you for that acknowledgement. Introducing Robert Lilly, I'm gathering that many of you know him already. But Robert first been inspector with ISI back in 1997, and he now leads teams as a reporting inspector, mainly in prep and junior schools. He's worked in the state sector as well as the independent sector. He's an experienced head too, with a range of experiences in that particular role. Personally, I thoroughly enjoyed working with Robert when we worked together at Leeds, and we were variously supportive and challenging to each other in our different roles. Robert now works both as a full-time inspector and as an educational consultant. The way we split the sessions today is slightly different to that was published originally. The content is the same, but we've changed the running order a little, I hope, to benefit you the more. So today we're really exploring the process of getting ready. We'll be looking at the self-evaluation form, the SEF, and its role in helping you to move your school forwards towards excellent. And tomorrow, the inspection visit and the associated procedures of those processes will be considered. So all of the processes that we'll look at together allow the inspection team to create their triangulated evidence base and successfully apply this evidence against the framework in order to ensure that the inspection team, arrive at a secure judgment. We'll consider how to ensure that your school readily meets the grade descriptors for excellent too. It is still the case, as we've worked in schools, myself and Robert, that they still believe that if inspectors see brilliant lessons when they come to visit, that the school will be judged as excellent. This is simply not true. Excellence in the ISI inspection framework is made up of many more components than this, and it's important to remember that the quality of teaching is not even graded at any point in the inspection. So today and tomorrow, as I've said, we'll look at all the elements that are considered in achieving an excellent grade in your inspection. It is a detailed set of processes and can't easily be done in the few weeks before you're expecting an inspection visit. It needs to start the day after you've got your last inspection report. It involves ensuring that the culture and the ethos of the school, both academically and pastorally, are as strong as they can be. Inspection involves compliance with various regulations, importantly covering those around safeguarding and health and safety of your pupils. It also involves the outcomes for pupils both in their academic achievement and in their personal development. Thus, it involves your whole curriculum in all its forms, and it involves what pupils can actually do and how they make progress as measured by assessments, as well as the pupils' wider contributions to school and society.
So the system we're talking about is far from an arbitrary system. We've got two different frameworks in inspection, one used by Ofsted, one by ISI, and they both come down from the DFE, and it's these criteria deemed to be the pillar of a good education for children that we're measured against. So are we, for example, keeping our children healthy and safe? Are we helping them to develop as good citizens? And are we guaranteeing that they're going to make progress in their learning? There's no point having an academically wonderful school if you're not safeguarding your pupils effectively. So we're going to guide you through both parts of the inspection process. And for me, the secret to the best inspection outcomes begin with having some key knowledge of the framework and spending time on the preparation on a regular basis. And we're assuming that whatever type of school you're in, that you're teaching a curriculum that offers some breadth and doesn't conflict with fundamental British values, and that you have opportunities for your pupils to work together outside the classroom in teams or houses or clubs. And to be honest, if you don't have these, then you're going to struggle to achieve a satisfactory grade, and you will struggle to meet the regulatory standards as laid out in the regulations book with ISI.
So let's start at the very beginning, and apologies if you are familiar with this, but I think it's worth doing. Normally, every 3 years, you will have an inspection conducted by a team of inspectors working on behalf of the Independent Schools Inspectorate. Every 3 years, they will come for some form of compliance visit to check on safeguarding, health and safety, and other regulatory requirements. And then the other visit, that's every 6 years, you'll receive an additional inspection on the quality of education. Having said all that, please be aware that ISI may need to inspect your school at any time within this broad general 3 to 6 year cycle. ISI may be asked by the DFE to undertake other inspections of your school, for example, emergency visits or visits that are brought forward because of an emerging concern, or it could be a progress monitoring visit or a material change visit. It's therefore important to keep on top of your own inspection work schedules and ensure that you're up to date and always inspection ready. An excellent approach to inspection would be to ensure that you are always inspection ready, abreast of the latest regulations, and embedding inspection principles and procedures as indicated by the framework into your own school development planning and whole school evaluation. All the information, all the regulations, all the criteria for the grades are on the ISI website, and someone at your school should have a log on to access these. They live at isi.net. So one of the things that I did in coordinating the inspections was try to get my head around the sort of information that ISI wanted available and the things that you needed to have regulatory available. And we've created an Excel sheet with those lists on in 3 separate spreadsheets on the file that Robert sent you. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to think about the documents, look at those things that are required for inspection. And just if you've got your highlighters, just to code the various pieces of information. If we're really lucky, everything will be green. But I'm from my own experience, I know that every time I did it, it was never that way. So we're asking to color code a document in green if it's up to date and is already uploaded to the ISI portal or on your external website. Code it yellow if it's up to date and you could lay your hands on it quickly, but it's not in the place that it needs to be as indicated by the Excel sheet. And color it red if it needs updating or you can't find it. I have to say, as I said before, often I was amber and some red, and that's perfectly normal if you do this once a year, but it is a really good starting point for being ready for inspection. So we're going to give you 10 minutes for the exercise, just to have a quick look through, and I think that might be a really good takeaway from this early part of the course.
Okay. Can I just confirm that everyone got the email with the documentation on there?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Exercises to do. If you do feel you need to go get yourself a glass of water, a cup of coffee, take a comfort break or whatever, I'm very aware that sitting here for an hour and a half is actually mind-numbing at times as an audience member. I've been through it myself, so we will try and keep you active.
It is something I used to do annually in Leeds, and it provides a really good foundation from which to start any inspection procedures. When you go back to school, therefore, log into the ISI site and choose the following: documentation, documents for inspection, and download a set and nominate a member of your SLT to be somebody who coordinates or an in-house expert. And I understand that some schools are quite small, so that may be delegated to yourself, but I do think it's worth doing. you need to think about scheduling a discussion at one of your SLT meetings or various subcommittee to ensure that you visit these documents annually. Be sure to fill any gaps that are revealed in the analysis that you've just done, because this will help massively in your preparation and will help the inspection process as well.
Now, you're probably already doing this, but if not, start by building yourself a cycle of self-evaluation, SF, for your school. You don't have to use it, but the ISI template is actually very good. You have to know your school really well to be judged as excellent. It doesn't have to be a perfect school. Everyone has shortcomings or areas for improvement, but if you don't know about them, then how honestly can leadership and management be judged to be at a high level? Make yourself honest and thoughtful, and well-evidenced parts of it will be read with interest by your RI. If, on the other hand, it proves to be a work of fiction, it'll be treated as such. If it's accurate and reflects what they actually see in real life, then you may even find bits of it being used as good solid evidence to help you get that judgment you're looking for. Now, we did ask you also to get hold of a copy of either a blank copy of the ISI SEF or to bring your own school version. So let's have a look at those now. Now, part one is based on compliance, and that's sort of screen you can things you can see on screen at the moment. And you do have to systematically work your way through that to ensure that you're aware of all the regulations. And we know that most schools are pretty practiced now in getting the fire extinguishers checked and the first aiders trained. An alarming number fail still on the single central register and staff recruitment procedures. Some still fail on security or insufficient checking of things like Legionella. And I can guarantee that this year somebody won't have updated their safeguarding policy yet in light of Keeping Children Safe 2020. And many won't have done the appropriate discussions with parents regarding the SRE, which is a new regulation for 2020. Not only have you got to teach it, you have to consult with your parents too. And even if you do secure an excellent outcome in the quality of education, your parents and prospective parents won't see that if the school is deemed to be unsafe for their children. So don't neglect this part of the inspection. And that's particularly true if you've got an EYFS, because if you've got tinies who are inspected under the Ofsted criteria, a failure in safeguarding automatically results in a failure of leadership and management and an overall failure. And likewise, if you're a through school and the whole school messes up on the single central register, that can stop your EYFS getting their outstanding grade as well. And likewise, sometimes a failing EYFS can stop the whole school getting it wrong as well. So do make sure you're absolutely watertight on those regulations, particularly safeguarding. So where to go next? Well, get yourself a team together. Share out the work. Include your leadership team, your DSL, your Senko, your site management leader perhaps. Probably worth a mention that too many cooks can spoil the broth, so you don't need absolutely everybody. Make it a lean, mean team, but people who got some responsibility can actually make some decisions on the ground. And there are a number of key jobs that need to be undertaken over the school year. And it's important to be explicit and clear about responsibilities. And it may be wise to incorporate some of these into the job descriptions of your key staff. So for example, who's ensuring that the external website is kept up to date? That your safeguarding policy and your previous inspection report are there for parents to see. They have to be on the website, by the way. Who ensures that the policies are updated by their review date? Who's checking that the information required by regulations is correctly implemented? Who's responsible for keeping that SEF or similar up to date and evolving? And the SCR. Don't forget the single central register. Ensure that someone senior sits with your HR staff, whoever that might be, to scrutinise that single central register from time to time. And if you're not clear what regulations go with each part of the SEF, check on the ISI site for document number 1.2, which is the commentary on the regulatory requirements, snappy title, and ensure that you have this year's version. This is your Bible. Who is your in-house SCR expert? Is it your safeguarding governor? Is it your DSL? Is it you? Is it it's often the head secretary? Make sure someone's up to date and up to speed with that. Now, the smaller your team, the longer this is going to take, particularly if you're in a very small school where a lot of it might fall on you. So you need to allow lots of time, as this work's going to sit on top of your normal day-to-day responsibilities, and especially under current circumstances. Forgive me, I can't resist a shameless plug here. You can, of course, save a little time by calling us to look at your safeguarding policy or SCR, or do a whole safeguarding and health and safety audit for an extremely reasonable fee. Paul.
As we've said before, you need to visit the SEF regularly, particularly this section 1, and you need probably to think about putting a standing item on your SLT agenda for September, as that's the time when most of the regulations, when most regulatory changes take place. But do be aware that some regulations will change through the year, but ISI will notify you of those very clearly. So I think building in a systematic cycle of monitoring the policies and the regulations and evaluating their effectiveness too is a sensible move. And please do remember that the regulations which are cited are minimum standards. These are minimum standards that taken all together contribute to keeping your children and your staff safe and healthy, and ensures that pupils are studying an appropriate curriculum, and that their parents are able to have access to the required information, and that parents can lodge an effective complaint. If you are indeed an excellent school, you probably should be surpassing some of these minimum standard regulations, even though the report on the compliance will only say that you have met or not met the standards. So I visited a school at one time, which was a really good outdoor education school, and their risk assessments were well understood by members of staff at all sorts of levels. And you would say not only had they met these standards, and that was what appeared in the report, but they had more than met them. And further, the culture of risk assessment in the school had been transposed so that children were educated from a very young age in junior school right through to top sixth form to take part in doing risk assessments for various outdoor activities in the school. And the impact of that actually hinges then to the educational quality inspection, because all of a sudden you have children who can undertake risk assessments, and that has impacts on their own personal development skills and their ability to communicate. So when you're working through the regulations, understand that they are minimum to be met, that in schools which are excellent, you would expect some of these to be more than met, although that's not a criteria that ISI would ever use, but they will have spin-on effects for the culture and ethos of your school. So on a regulatory compliance inspection, all the regulations across all 8 parts of the standards are thoroughly inspected. On an educational quality inspection, an EQI, visits, most of the inspection will be on pupil outcomes, on their achievement and personal development of the pupils. But you will still be inspected on key compliance aspects in what is called a focused compliance inspection. These include safeguarding the single central register and the information that you must legally make available to parents, amongst other things. Once you have all these things in place to successfully tackle all the regulatory compliance parts in part 1 of the SEF, then you'll need to look at part 2 of the SEF, which relates to the quality of education for your pupils.
Now, one area for the inspection includes considering how well you fulfill your school aims. And the first question here relates to that. A little thought about the aims of your school and its whole raison d'etre can go a long way. Some schools begin with a staff session to either revisit their aims and refresh staff knowledge. Other people take the opportunity to actually reframe their aims with a subtle change of language. Be careful how you do that, though. I went to one school where, because the aims were in the prospectus, the letterhead and all the other outward facing materials, and they'd only changed it on the SEF, that suddenly looked rather inconsistent, and getting all that wrong can cost a lot to change too. But thinking about your aims is actually really, really important. It is something that comes up in the report. Some schools choose to look at this aims section last, after looking at all the others, but it does need some serious thoughts, as they are quite challenging questions. So we've sent you a sample of aims from 3 different schools. And what we're going to do now is we're going to actually get together and we're going to talk through some of those aims. What we're looking to get you to do is to actually think what an inspector would expect to see or to hear while they were there on the ground to confirm that the school is actually meeting their aims. We're going to take 15 minutes on this, and then Paul will take us through a bit of a debrief. So what we're looking at is getting you inside the inspector's head. When they inspect school aims, what would they expect the team to be looking at, to be seeing, to be hearing? And what would that look like, do we think, actually on the ground? So if you have the documents with those aims on, that would be really useful. Take a second just to read through those, and then we'll chime in. I think with a number of us here right now, actually, we can probably do it. in one large room, I think, rather than go for breakout rooms and smaller groups of 2s and 3s. So we'll do it all together. Just take a second to look at the information, and then we'll have a good chat about what that actually means and what that looks like. So let's have a good look at school one then, if you had a chance to read that one. This is an independent senior school, single-sex day school. Just have a little thinking and talk to us about what you'd expect to see if you're an inspector walking around that school. What would faith? How would you decide whether the school was meeting its aim about faith?
I think I'd like to talk to some non-Anglican children and see how they felt about the faith aspect of the school. So do they feel included?
I would expect to see some aspect of celebration of Christian faith around the school, whether in assemblies and the such like within the classroom, CSHE lessons and the such like displays around school. Would like to have a look at the RE curriculum as well. Yeah, well, that's good stuff. Actually, one question I didn't ask a little earlier: are any of you actually team inspectors at the moment?
I'm sort of a team inspector, but I'm waiting to be launched. L plates on.
So you got all the theory, but not the practicals yet. Yeah.
I might have forgotten the theory, to be honest.
I think we were in the same course. Was it last October?
Yes.
Yes, I remember.
Hi.
Hello. I'm the same as Rob.
Yeah, I'm a team inspector. I haven't been out on the road for a good few months now, obviously, as many inspectors are in the same boat, but looking forward to going out again. I wonder if Robert and Paul, you could give us some any intel that you have in terms of the inspectorate and the such like resumption of inspections beyond what's already been published. Slightly off topic.
I think we are just waiting for half term because they've said they'll have a half term lead in, and I think that's exactly where we are. And I mean, this is conjecture from me, but you look at the numbers and you look at the state and the work that schools are doing. DFE have said, you know, Ofsted inspectors have gone into state schools, a number of them, to check that they're safe in terms of COVID.
Yeah,
they wanted to do January 21, but it may well be they push back on that as well, I think. And it might be that for independent schools, there is a similar thing that Ofsted are doing, but it's all conjecture from my part.
Yeah, sure.
There are some inspections going out at the moment for regulatory follow-up, or where perhaps there's a safeguarding concern on a previous inspection. So some of the full-time guys are still doing some of those. But what they've said is they will try and give 6 weeks notice before a resumption of the process. So we would know by October half term if that was going to be a January start. Strictly personal opinion, that's not looking too likely from where I'm sitting at the moment, but I'm not at headquarters.
Yeah. Thank you both.
If I can interject there, we were inspected at the end of August in the summer holidays, and we have sailed through all of our inspections, and we had a compliance just before the week before we were due to come back to school. And there was absolutely no reason we'd sailed through on the last 2 inspections. So they are still doing them. So beware.
I think, as Robert says, they're obliged to do them if there are reasons to do them. I think is the sort of they will have a set of priorities and criteria to go on.
Good question, Bill. Thank you. I'm going to ask us to come back to the aims, though, if you don't mind. What about that character one on the first school? How would we recognise character? What would we be looking for? Where might you see, for example, the perseverance and resilience in action?
On the games field.
Sensible, and you might think about that in terms of the less able sports student, or you might think about it the less able physicist. it is remembering that the framework is about all pupils, and it's easy sometimes with aims to vision this for the very best and a small group in your school. And it's got to be, it covers the aims for the whole school.
I mean, it'd be nice to see something in terms of, you know, the booklets and the such like, and the lessons that you're going around, and seeing the level of challenge in the work that's being offered to the children, and the feedback loop that's created by the teaching staff. And if children are given another opportunity to come back and work through a specific problem or area that they haven't really quite nailed, and to see if they're able to get through that and reach a successful outcome.
One of the things you might see in a school is the fact that that sort of resilience is a progressive thing, that it might be it'll look in a particular way in the junior years, but actually it's built on over time. So by the time the students reach year 10 or year 12, they are really quite driven, and they don't give up, and they do seek resources to support themselves. And that progression is quite a feature of the framework, that students make good progress, not only in academic achievement, but personal development too.
I think one of the important things, guys, is that you know your school aims and you have discussed those with your staff, because they're actually they're there for a reason. They're there to steer the way you behave and the way you role model things in school. You are being judged about them, but as we'll keep coming back to, these are there to help the children and to help the staff. So you ought to know them. You ought to be able to recite them. And when inspectors ask you about them, if you've got some examples of how you fulfill them, that will really, really help you along your way towards excellence.
Can I just go to is it the second school, Robert, I think, which has the word guide as their sort of mantra for their aims?
Yes.
Number 3. Is it 2 or 3? I can't remember what the number 3. So that notion of being a democratic school, the D there is for a democracy. How would that represent itself? Because that's an interesting word to use in a school. How would you think you might see that on the ground?
Like school council, would you be looking for sort of opportunities for children to sort of take leadership or be involved in voting for head boys and girls, pupil voice for staff interviews, things like that?
I think that would be a really good idea. And actually a school council that does slightly more than just school dinners and lunches, and, you know, that actually is embedded, not just as the best pupils are part of the school council, but how everybody's engaged in that democratic process. Every student, and I come back to that thing, it's about, you know, every student of all abilities as much of the time as you can, so that they all experience what democracy looks like. I think it was a powerful word when I picked that aim up just randomly from a school, and I thought, yeah, democracy is a really powerful word for us. And how does it look for 3-year-olds, democracy, or 4-year-olds, and what would you see in that classroom to say, actually, do you know what? They are building on the notion of democracy and they are increasing understanding. What might that look like?
Like voting on activities, or like what they want to do with their golden time on an afternoon, or is that they've got more say possibly in how things happen or are arranged, or, you know,
that's absolutely,
are they involved in like the bullying charter or the merit system or rewards and sanctions, that sort of thing?
That's absolutely, that sounds, you know, absolutely what I would be looking for. And I'd be looking for it to be embedded, so that the kids aren't suddenly going, when you arrive as an inspector, going, hang on, we've been asked to, you know, the older ones, we've been asked to do something we've never been asked to do before. Because as an inspector, you have to report what you see and hear. And you would say, it came as a shock on your evidence base that, you know, the children look shocked. It needs to be embedded and part of the practice.
So having your aims in mind when you're walking around the school, you're looking for examples of things you can find that exemplify those aims. And sometimes they're very, very much more straightforward than you might think, as Kirsty just said. Shall we move on there, Paul? Has everybody had a chance to think about those, you think?
I don't particularly feel the need to debrief that anymore. It is just think about what your own school aims are and how it would be represented to a visitor. If a visitor came with no idea of the aims, what would they say of the school? And if they match to your aims, then I'd say you're doing a very, very good job. But sometimes schools choose aims which are very bland. and therefore it's really difficult to create that individual identity for your school. But do walk and do get your staff to walk and look at behaviours and what they see and hear and say, what is it that strikes us about the school and our students?
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah, of course.
I started in this school, which is a very small prep school, last September, and I picked it up. Well, there weren't really aims, but there was nothing really. I sort of, it was just ticking along. So after the first, I suppose, term, when I got myself in place and sort of sorted things out, I started the process of new values, aims, mission, the whole sort of thing with the kids, the parents, etc., 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 which of course came to a grinding halt in March. So we've picked it up again, and we're sort of hoping, you know, we've worked on it this half term, and it's certainly for almost like a big launch, I would say, from after October. But my concern is obviously we were due, and I was a bit relieved to hear this might not happen. Our inspection is supposed to be in January. And how much sort of do inspectors take on board that these things are just being introduced when they're talking to children and things like this, as opposed to things that have been embedded for years? I mean, it's probably a very straightforward question, no, not a straightforward answer, but just to put my mind at ease, really.
Yeah, the fact you're on a journey, it is taken into consideration. I'm going to talk in just a few moments a bit more about the CEF and the sort of information that might go into it, and the sort of things you've described there would be going into it. So the inspectors would have, or certainly the RI would have that as a background piece of knowledge. They would talk to you about that. And it might be until those aims are fully fulfilled that you're not going to be excellent. But if you try and say these are our aims and they clearly don't match up with the pupils, that looks silly. But just to explain that you're on a journey, that we're not perfect yet, you know, that's perfectly laudable. To answer the question.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on then. So the CEF for part 2 shows that EQI visits are focused on 2 simple criteria. Firstly, the quality of pupils' academic and other achievements, and secondly, the quality of pupils' personal development. And there are 8 sections within each of these. So let's understand the sort of areas we're looking at, because if you understand these really well, then you're halfway towards excellence. So on the achievement side, we've got 8 categories, as I said, and here they are just for you to have a look at. So we'll go through those in a bit more detail and try and explain what's involved with each one. So firstly, we're asked to look at exam results and the change in attainment over time, and the official description is there in the small print on your screen right now. It's about assessment, but not only about assessment, it also looks at the progress there as well. It's where you get to show off your standards of attainment and also the rates of progress exhibited by your pupils. As I say, it's not just about exam results. Inspectors will look at working books. They'll be interested to look at the starting points for pupils as well as the current attainment. So for example, if you've got a SEND child who maybe started with a reading age of 4 years, 6 months when they were in year 3, but perhaps they've achieved 7 years by the end of year 4, that's outstanding progress, even though they are still below age expectations. On the other hand, if you've got a child who gets a standardized score of 135 in their maths in year 3, well above age expectations, and then they secure a score of 130 in year 4, then they're still above age expectations, but what does that say about the progress? They have progressed as expected. Perhaps you could even argue it's good progress, but is it excellent? And if it's, so we need to look at more than exam scores. If you believe that pupil has made excellent progress, we need to see that in their books and in their classroom response, as well as just those test scores. Think about your evidence base and how you want to present it. Also ensure that the colleague responsible for talking these sorts of things through with your inspectors knows the whole story behind the scores. In some schools, we've seen examples of things changing due to a change in examination board. Some schools put in subject reviews, which can result in a change in the way things are done during the year. It might be that the staff have had recent inset, which could accelerate or change results. Make sure that your people are aware of those when they're talking to inspectors. They need to explain what they can see and why it's happening. The second area, knowledge, skills and understanding, often abbreviated to KSU. And this is about how they're growing across the whole curriculum. There's a whole list of different areas of sorts of study we want to see them doing. So it's about the breadth of education. It gets you to think whether the levels of attainment and quality of work is even across all the subjects. Look at the sample of student work. Do they really try hard and take care in maths, but the history work's slapdash? If so, why and what we're going to do about it? Does your school really offer a range of study opportunities across all the areas? Do you offer something that goes well beyond these? If so, flag it up in that CEF and demonstrate the impact on the students in your CEF. Any questions on those two? Anything you want to draw out there?
Okay, if I move on to A3, communication. In my experience, again, I think schools don't give this the full consideration across all 4 areas. It includes speaking, importantly, I think. Sometimes that's forgotten. So can you find examples of language and communication across the range of subjects? For example, do students listen to each other effectively in PSHE, and therefore do they also do it in all the lessons? Do they listen to the teacher effectively? Do they listen to each other effectively? How do your pupils talk to visitors and to each other? It's worth taking the time as you develop your CEF to actually observe that and then make some reference to it. How well do your students listen to, say, a radio podcast in lesson, or to a foreign language if that's appropriate for your school? How well do all the pupils, not just the most confident and capable, speak in front of others? And again, think of an inspection experience where some of the less able students were encouraged and enabled by their peers and applauded to build their confidence in speaking. Do they carry their advanced use of the subordinate clause? So we go to writing. So are they able to transfer those communication skills that they develop, say, in an English lesson into history lessons or into science lessons? How do you know as a school that your students are making that progress? What methods are you using to record it in order that you can say on your CEF for A3 communication, all 4 communication areas, all children are making what you might deem as excellent progress? You need to build some way of demonstrating that quickly and effectively. And similarly, if you go to A4 for numeracy, it's not just about the mathematics lesson that you see. It's how the pupils use those numeracy skills developed in maths across the wider curriculum. That might mean, for example, that the physics formula in year 9 is used effectively because of what's gone on in mathematics. How well do your year 4 draw a line graph in sciences? What have they learned perhaps in the maths lessons and now transferred to the science lesson with ease and effectiveness? Whilst teaching isn't itself, we've said this before, is not itself judged, effective planning, which results in well-organised and dynamic teaching, will undoubtedly aid the pupils in the development and progress, and may be cited as a contributory factor to the success of the pupils. So I've seen examples where the way in which the numeracy has been embedded across the curriculum, originating from mathematics, has been applied really successfully, and there are common strands and ways of working across the school to the benefit of the students. So ensure your planning builds in lots of opportunities for skills to go across those different subject areas, and get subject leaders to talk to each other. It's inefficient for pupils and teachers. The physics teacher thinks they've spent time teaching that formula if the maths teacher has already covered it or has covered it in a different way. I think that often causes confusion to children. You do see that occurring. So my message on this one is really think about numeracy across the curriculum. Do not have subjects doing the same thing in different ways because it causes confusion, and try and, I suppose, be synergetic with the way in which that numeracy thread spreads across the curriculum. Any questions on those communication and numeracy skills?
Synergetic's a good word for a Thursday morning, Paul.
I managed to say that. It was in my head and then it came out of my mouth amazingly.
Everybody's favourite. Number 5, IT. So this looks at, again, the competence in information and communication technology skills, but also, like we've just heard, also the application across other areas of learning. So no one's inspecting your provision here. It doesn't matter how many hundreds of PCs or iPads your school has. It's about how the pupils use what they have to develop the learning that matters. So small schools aren't penalised for having less equipment. Inspectors want to see pupils who are competent in basic core skills, but want to see those skills being incorporated into enhancing their learning. So good examples, excellent examples might include in history, manipulating a spreadsheet of population data to show how their local city grew during the Industrial Revolution, or using an art package to reproduce and enhance the work of a famous artist, or the use of OneNote to present video and soundtrack to a DT project they've just undertaken. You'll need your IT team to be thinking about how the children can successfully do this and what infrastructure you can best use. We then move on to number 6, which is study skills. And this is what the children are effectively bringing to the party when they come to the lessons. It's their ability to draw on sources and their ability to develop their thinking. Excuse me a second. So this assesses how well your students are moving towards being curious and independent learners for their age. In class, have you got kids who routinely help themselves to dictionaries or thesauruses? Can they independently use the library or another data source to help find appropriate study material? And once they've found it, can they then synthesize that material and actually use it? In class, can they relate their previous learning or their own experiences to the lesson to help them put things in context or to spot patterns? And again, one example from an inspection when studying agriculture in the Vendée. We heard a student point out that the channels in the fields on the aerial view looked exactly the same as the pattern they'd learnt about when studying ancient Egyptian irrigation previously. So making those connections. Another young pupil noticed that creation stories from around the world were actually really very similar. They didn't have an answer for it, but they were asking the question, how could this be? How could those stories be so similar when people didn't travel in the way they do now? Now that shows real curiosity, doesn't it? And real thinking about that information. And those are the sort of things we're looking to see. Any questions on those two, IT or study? Back to you, Paul.
So the final two criteria in the achievement it starts with the academic and other achievements of the pupils in your school. And in many respects, this is the most straightforward area probably to excel in. Simply, the inspection team want to know how well pupils do both academically and across their extracurricular activities. Do your pupils always take the top ranked places in highly competitive local grammar school exams or succeed in securing courses at the best universities? Out of the classroom, how well do your sports teams do? The inspection team may not be so keen on individual successes unless they are clearly the product of school-only coaching rather than outside clubs.
Sorry to interrupt, Paul. Yeah, just to specify that, lots of schools tell us how wonderful their national champion cross-country runner is, when in fact he spends all his training outside at the local club and only races for the school once in a blue moon. So make sure the things you're extolling are the products of your school, clubs, societies, training, coaching, whatever it might be. Yeah.
And sometimes it's a hybrid of both, external clubs and yours. So in your CEF, please, be honest about it and articulate it, but say what your school does to enable and promote that. I think that's the key thing. So also in there, pupils taking music grades or laminar exams. Do you enter choral competitions or performing arts festivals? All of those can be logged in a very easy way in the CEF, and that just will make it easy for the team to get a handle on it. Go back through newsletters and tweets is a really good way of doing it. And it doesn't need to be you that does it. That could even be a set of senior pupils who are in year 6 who can actually look at that information and pull it together for you. So, be creative in how you do pull it together. The other thing I would say is consider how you celebrate and recognise the achievement at all levels in all ways, both in the formal curriculum and the extracurricular activity. It's easy to think this is about your superstars again. So think about the incremental progress of all abilities of all the students. How do you or they register that small bits of progress? And again, thinking about the school with the outdoor education, it was watching their ability to go further on hikes in more challenging weather from a very early age and a very safe environment. But actually those kids knew they were achieving, and the school enabled them to celebrate it. So do think about all of the abilities of all of the kids and the way in which their achievements are recorded, because I think it does help to create cultures in schools which celebrate progress by all. The last one here is attitudes to learning. And traditionally, this is where independent schools have done really well. And inspectors, they'll be looking for the pupils and the attitudes that they bring to further their own learning. It's not just about whether they sit and listen through the early years, whilst this in itself is quite an achievement. It's how they respond to the lesson. It's about how they got on with the work and the nature of their talk with a learning partner. It's how well they work in groups. None of this can be turned on specifically for inspectors. If the children aren't in the habit of working in this way, if you try and do it on the day of inspection, it will all go wrong. And if it goes wrong, the inspectors will just report what they're seeing, and it will be kids' unfamiliarity with trying to work in that way. So be clear with your staff to use their opportunities and lessons to develop pairs work, group work, and enabling children to develop those positive attitudes to learning, both using the teacher and each other as resources. There can also be a link to the study skills section here, so please be aware of that. Attitudes is also about the willingness to engage and ask questions and make their own observations. Think how likely your pupils are to go off after a stimulating lesson and seek further information, explore and discuss what they've seen and heard in a lesson with each other, or with their parents, or with their teacher. How often does that happen in your schools? Do you see it happening? Are some teachers better at creating that climate than others? Because for me, when it comes to attitudes to learning, I think it is about the pupils taking that drive and interest and enthusiasm further. When you see it in your own school or an inspection, I think it can, one of those moments when you do see that happen, it just makes you smile. And I ask the question again, how widespread it is in your own school, and is it more prevalent in certain classes than other classes? And if it's not as prevalent in some, are you doing something to move that forwards towards that excellent practice, towards attitudes to learning? And does it work in the same way? Do you see that for boys and for girls? Do you see it for the most able and the least able? Do you see it for children of English as an additional language? Or is it just the most able in your school that bring that to the party? Inspection framework expects excellent schools to have excellent attitudes to learning for all children. Any questions on the whole of that academic achievement section?
Okay, we've been going an hour. How are you feeling, delegates, in terms of your own personal fatigue at this stage? Would it be beneficial to take a 2-minute comfort break, or shall we plow on? Keep going? Then we shall keep going. Let's move on then to the other side of things. So you mentioned there the achievement stuff. The other side of the coin is the personal development stuff. And traditionally, I'll be honest, we find it a bit harder to gather evidence for some of these criteria. So anything that you can do to flag up opportunities for the teams to see the pupils' personal development in action is really helpful, and is going to help you secure that excellent grade. The first one is looking at how pupils deal with self-understanding. So we're looking at what they think about themselves, looking at their self-confidence. We're looking at how they improve their own learning. So it's about how they're growing in their self-awareness. If you walk into a class, are you looking at a group who believe in themselves? Can they talk to each other? Can they talk to adults? Can they show the necessary self-discipline to be good students within the classroom and within their activities? I've got an extract from a prep school report to show how simple this can be, which I'll read to you now. Because all this sounds very grand, doesn't it, when you put it in these wonderful phrases, but actually on the ground, this is what it looked like. So in a year 1 maths lesson, children worked as a class on a problem, showing great confidence in volunteering answers, yet considerable self-restraint in taking turns. Now, understand the significance for a group of 6-year-olds who are prepared to listen to each other and take turns. Year 3 pupils addressed their own shortcomings with a personal development plan. For example, they discussed with their teacher the benefits of their target and strategies for achieving those targets. For example, I must get a better pencil case so I don't lose things. So you'll see that's age appropriate, but actually really quite straightforward. It doesn't have to be grandiose, it's practical things. And depending on the age of the child, very simple things very often that show they're thinking about these things, they're reflecting on themselves, They're reflecting on their own shortcomings and looking to move those forward. Keep coming back to this point that teaching is not graded, but clearly you need good teachers and good teaching, to embed these practices with the children. And in this school, we just mentioned the high quality teaching was cited as a contributory factor. Moving on from that, we go to number 2, which is decision making. And again, it's about children understanding that the decisions they make actually matter. And some of it, again, is simpler than you might expect. With young children, it might be simply that learning that not behaving is going to cost me 5 minutes of my break time. For older ones, it could be that making a decision to work to the best of my ability now is going to help me get that important university offer further down the line. When I take lunch with your pupils, when I come into your school, will they tell me they've specifically chosen items from the salad bar because it's healthy, not just because the queue's shorter? Although I suppose that's a decision too, isn't it? School councils are a great source of material here. Can you find any examples where the pupils have instructed their council rep and then there was a discussion about a particular project that was realised to benefit everyone? Go around your school looking for examples. If you can't find any, then think about what kind of culture change or perhaps what kind of PSE programme you need to bring in to give your pupils some opportunities to make some decisions. Well, okay with that one?
Okay, so the next two are sort of linked together around the SMSC, spiritual, moral, social, cultural development. So I'll start with the spiritual understanding. In experience, a surprising number of schools still think that it's all to do with the RE lessons, but it's so much wider than that. And it relates, spiritual understanding relates to all things non-material. Back in the day when I trained as a team inspector, one of the RIs used to use the phrase, and it was adopted, was awe and wonder. And I think it's, the children have that notion of awe and wonder. Their mouths drop open, their eyes go wider. It's still a great measure, I think, for gauging pupil reactions to nature, to music, to art, or to some deeper spiritual thinking. And that applies right across the ages. I can think of sixth formers who did it in lessons, and I can think of little, year threes who just had that open mouth moment. So for younger pupils, it might be seen in their reaction to seeing spring flowers in the school garden. Year 7 pupils fascinated by the surrealist art of Salvador Dali, and year 10 pupils genuinely moved by the soulful singing of one of their peers in an assembly. The only way to develop pupils in this area is to give exposure and opportunities to explore this side of life. It might be through assemblies or concerts or lessons, or thinking creatively in lessons themselves. Inspected high-performing schools, and genuinely, you've gone around and thought there's no soul in this school. It's achieving really high results, but it's lacking that sort of students who have a soul, or it's not being developed as much. And more moderate academic profile schools where it was a key strength, and you could see it, and you could see how the students responded to things that were arriving in their lives, bits in the lessons or outside in the field. It's the staff you have got a key role here, because I think the way in which they role model how to respond and to express feelings and to show their emotions is quite an important feature, particularly for younger children, so that they role model, and it's okay to talk about the feelings that have been raised by certain stimuli. So think about how your teachers are enabling that to happen in those classes. Because it isn't just about the children, it's about actually teaching and helping guide them towards being able to express response to non-material aspects of the world around them. So P4 is moral understanding and responsibility for their own behaviour. And I think this is, again, relatively straightforward. So simply as inspectors, we would be looking all the time at behaviour, not only in lessons, but in and around corridors when nobody else is particularly around. Do pupils instinctively follow the rules? Do they get the rules? Do they follow them because it's oppressive, or do they follow them because they're part of a community? If it says walk left in the corridors, do they actually do it? Do they make the right choices in challenging situations? And how great is the need for sanctions in the school? Are they sort of able to establish their own moral codes in their own community? And do children self-correct each other? What do you see in your school? Inspectors will speak to younger pupils and often agreed that their own classroom rules as a group. So again, that's part of developing the moral code in their community. Can Key Stage 1 pupils say why rules are in place? And I would say that's true of Year 10s as well. I think if schools have rules, there needs to be an explanation that children understand why those rules are in place. Often as not, it's about keeping those children safe and helping them to understand that. You'll find Year 9s who think the rules are unfair. But actually, when you process them as a school, they probably reflect, yeah, they're fair. They're good rules. For older pupils, the new RSE guidance and regulations are also a great vehicle for them to show that they understand about responsibility for their own behaviour in a relationship. And I think that's important both in junior and senior settings. If your school covers this, ensure that you add examples of work to the books for work scrutiny for inspectors to see. So part of all of these things we're doing with the A and the Ps, do think about the written evidence, because again, as inspectors, we're looking to find evidence of all of these things occurring, not just in what we see and hear, but what we read in students' books. Any questions on those two areas, which I think are sometimes quite difficult to see and hear and record, but I think they are fundamental to a school ethos.
I'll move on then to number 5. This is about social development, and essentially this is about whether your pupils can work together. So you need to have opportunities built into your curriculum for them to do this. This might be working in groups to solve problems in lessons, or it might be pulling together as a house team in a competition. Inspectors will want to see any evidence you have, such as photographs of events or of finished products, and that might include anything like an extract from a school newsletter about those 3 Year 5 pupils who raised just £50 for the NSPCC with a bun sale, a recording of a spectacular house music concert, or a demonstration of a kit car built by Year 12. And I've seen all those things in real life. You should know what goes on in your school. Log your evidence as these things happen and ensure that inspectors get to see it when they come. Keep it reasonably recent though, because if you've got things that happened 5 years ago and we're asking young pupils to explain their experiences about things, they won't remember what happened years and years ago. They never met the pupils that did it. So keep it as recent as you can. Number 6 is about how our pupils make a difference to the life of others. And that's both within school and it's in the local community. And this is a particularly a big one where boarding schools can be seen to, you can see the difference that boarding makes. It's an area for all of us where we can really showcase in our school, I think. So again, what do your pupils do to make a positive difference to others? Start thinking about that at class level, then go up to year groups and then whole school, and then think of the wider local community. So are your younger pupils, for example, class captains or monitors? Have you got some who act as counsellors? Are there examples of older pupils helping younger ones, maybe in shared reading or organising playground games? Do you have student buddies or mentors? And then move outwards. Do any of them actually help in the community? I've seen examples of students who went out with little yellow jackets on, planting for Britain in Bloom. And in some senior schools, you can find volunteers on a Wednesday afternoon helping either in local primary schools or in local charity shops or whatever it might be. These things say a huge amount about the culture in your school. And again, an extract from a report to read you. Again, it's from a prep school, and it showed us that pupils are widely involved in supporting numerous local charities, performing in nearby nursing homes or busking to raise Christmas funds at the local shopping centre. In school, there's an array of positions of responsibility, including class captains, prefects and representative counsellors. Older pupils work as playground helpers and reading buddies to help younger pupils. So that's what excellent looked like in that particular school. And I know many of your schools already look like that as well. So again, go out and audit your own provision. It can't happen without the cooperation of your staff to organise these things. So if you're thinking your offering is not yet as strong as it could be, identify a few key individuals to instigate some new ventures and initiatives, both in school and in the community. And do remember though, we're doing all this to benefit the pupils, not just to score inspection points. Anything to ask on those sections?
What if usually all of those activities within the community would happen normally, but in light of the current regulations, that has had to stop?
That's understandable. And again, if you've got any examples from last January, February, for example, they're as recent as they can be. But yeah, they will show common sense.
We're all right to include them if we're drawing possibly on examples from maybe a year, like 2 years ago.
A year, 18 months ago is no issue at all. I'm talking, when I said that, I was talking like 5 years. Expecting year 3 to talk about something that happened 5 years ago, when is difficult.
Right.
But yeah, a year or two ago is not a problem, and in many of the kids' memories, that's still quite recent.
Right, super.
Okay. Paul?
Okay, so if I move on to P7, which I think in current climate is interesting, respecting diversity and cultural understanding. It's true to say our schools have become increasingly diverse in recent years. Whatever type of school you're in, the chances are you've got a variety of faiths and cultural heritages, a range of family languages, and a mixture of socioeconomic backgrounds. So you ask the question, how do your pupils interact positively with each other? How do pupils of different ages or different socioeconomic backgrounds mix? Given the recent bad press in some of the well-known schools during the summer, will the pupil questionnaires that inspectors will send out tell us about factions or bullying? How do you help pupils to celebrate their own culture and to more deeply understand the culture of others? So most schools will use assemblies to promote key messages, and some schools have published assembly programs, which are, I would advocate, as a really good way to move, even if it's not every assembly, at least some key assemblies, to pick up the key events and festivals that are celebrated through the school population and the wider community. Some use pupils of a particular faith to run those assemblies, and I've seen that at all ages, to explain how their family will be celebrating Eid or Rosh Hashanah. Those programs will include key British events too, such as Remembrance Day, or special events such as Anti-Bullying Week. What's the impact on the pupils of these events? Are they seen, heard, and then forgotten? Or do the assemblies and those inputs help to build the understanding for tolerance and respect for other students who are different? I've also been in schools where pupils have used their lessons to explore things like Aboriginal artwork, and where younger pupils have access to reading material from around the world, written by authors from a variety of cultures. But again, I say it's not just about that it happens, because that would be provision. What's the outcomes for the pupils? How do you know it's had an impact on the pupil? Does it change them in positive ways? What do they think? What do they feel? What do they say about these inputs and their understanding of diversity in their own communities within the school and more broadly? And it's not just about ethnicity and culture. Is there a place in your school curriculum where gender stereotypes are challenged, or where pupils can empathise with the plight of gender fluid in an age-appropriate manner? Inspectors will observe the pupils and will see very easily how the dynamics in and around school look. In the most successful schools, the children just see their peers as other kids to play, work and play with. They don't see differences as others might. And they appreciate why others may have a particular and sometimes different view to them. These types of schools develop pupils who can recognise difference in their peers and others. The pupils know about those differences, for example, things of gender and culture and disabilities and socioeconomic backgrounds, for example. They understand about the causes of the differences and the perceptions of others about those differences. In the very best schools, all the pupils can genuinely celebrate the differences in their own community and the community more widely. Is that what your school looks like? Well, take those surveys, do those observations, have lunch with some pupils and ask them questions like, how do you deal with the different sorts of people we have in school, and what kind of differences are there? All of this is a cultural keystone, and we will not be excellent unless the climate in your school is centered on mutual respect and high levels of tolerance for other people. And I think there's a body of work to do in that regard. At whatever level you're at, it's one of those that never goes away. So finally, P8 is staying safe and healthy. And there are two parts in this. And part one is very much about safety and includes elements of personal risk assessment. And it includes online safety in a very big way. We would expect students to be knowledgeable at their age-appropriate level on their own online safety and what they can do and should be doing. These things can be taught. Some schools have particular modules in the PSE programme on the IT courses to help. Others enhance it through things such as outdoor learning or residential, as I referenced the school earlier, who had children writing risk assessments, which actually shows that they're thinking about other people and the risks that they face on an activity. How do you do it in your school? Ensure that you're pulling out the thread so that the inspectors can clearly see what's going on. What is it that you do that enables pupils to make themselves safe in a whole variety of situations, that they are risk aware? Part 2 is about healthy. Do your pupils get enough time on PE or games? Do they run around at some stage of the day? How much do they do that? What are your school meals like? Will we see pupils making healthy choices? And with reference to keeping children safe in education 2020 and the new emphasis on mental health, how do you help pupils to maintain a work-life balance and help them through exam nerves or balance their homework with their out-of-school commitments? I'd add in there as well, how do you get the very quiet child? Do they have someone they can go and talk to in terms of their own well-being in school? How likely are they to talk? How well do you pick them up? I think those last two probably have quite a lot of importance right here, right now. But I would stress again, all of the A8s, A1 to 8, P1 to 8, are the areas around the framework that inspectors will tend to spend time looking for evidence. And if you can make that evidence very accessible, and we can triangulate them as an inspection team, then the likely outcomes in your inspection will be much better.
You and your team need to work out where your school actually is for each of these categories we've just discussed. So how are we actually going to do that? Well, firstly, ask your staff, because your SEF should be school owned. It should be a corporate thing and not just yours. Ask them for evidence of what they do to support pupils' progression in each of those categories. And this is a great staff meeting or inset activity, although you probably find staff will need some explanation of what's involved in each of the criteria. I've done this before. I've split the staff into cross-year group teams and included people like TAs with them as well, and then assigned a member of leadership team to chair or scribe for the groups. And then we brought all those notes back to an SLT meeting afterwards to review where we are, what we need to tell the staff further, and what to do next. And an important thing to note when you write this up on your SEF is not just to list what Paul has called provision. For example, we've got loads of iPads. Rather, you need to think what impact on pupils this provision has. So for example, you might say something like, regular use of iPads means that all children are fluent and confident in using IT to support their learning, as evidenced by the graphical analysis in Excel shown during a year physics project, or the range of electronic media used in year 3 when they filmed their own puppet shows in DT. Now, if I'm your reporting inspector, when I read that in your SEF, you've already signposted me towards some high quality examples of work, which I can then verify. I don't care you've got iPads. Provision means nothing. It's how you use what you have to further the progress and the development of the pupils that matters. So show us the impact. And you then need to support those staff assertions that you've drawn out from them with some real evidence. And the evidence that you cite can be curriculum planning, assessment results, the number of children winning drama prizes at the local festival, or your netball team results, or a parental survey. Now on screen now, I'm going to show you a real SEF from a school I inspected earlier in the year. I've tried to make it anonymous, of course. Take a second to read through this. It's not perfect actually, but what they've tried to do is show where their evidence comes from rather than just guessing. And they've backed it up with some actual statistics. ESB, by the way, is the English speaking board. So they've made a statement, they've tried to get some evidence, tried to get some stats in there.
I would say the bullet point really helps, Robert, in those SEFs when you're reading them as an inspector.
Yeah. I want to know what you found, what the headline is, why you found it, where you found it. A lot of people write beautiful flowing prose and philosophical statements. It's nothing. Need some hard evidence in there. We'll send these slides out for you later, by the way, so you can digest them at your own pace. But
so to gather your information, you need to get out and do lots of lesson visits. If you do these routinely or as part of performance management processes, then you already will have a bank of evidence that you can incorporate. that it can be difficult sometimes to extract pupil evaluations from traditional lesson observations, which tend to be much more teacher focused. And I don't know where you each are on that, but this is about pupil outcomes. So in his last years as a head working in Leeds, Robert introduced a learning walk form based on those pupil achievements and pupils' personal development criteria that we went through from the ISI framework. He also taught middle managers how to note the observations in an inspection style. So we're looking at A1 to 8, we're looking at P1 to 8. Robert sensibly preferred to use the phrase learning walk rather than lesson observation. The management team separately then spent 5 minutes in the classroom to soak up the atmosphere, watch the pupils and look in their books and look at the displays. These were not formal lesson observations, although they still had a place as some part of the performance management. It looked like this. There was a page for A1 to 8 and a page for P1 to 8, as you can see, with some general comment boxes as well. The team had them on clipboards and also on their iPads so that wherever they went, they could annotate the sheet. And I would say also, it's not just in lessons, this could be on corridors or in playgrounds as well. The team tended to make a sheet last a week and then took them to a leadership team meeting for evaluation every few weeks. So let's look at the A3 box, where you'll see a sample comment made by one of the observers. They write, pupils' written skills are excellent. Year 5 know a wide range of vocabulary for their age and used it with great fluency in their description of mythical beasts. This reflects a recent school-wide initiative on creative writing. If we break that down, the headline is simply, pupils' written skills are excellent. There's a grade judgment here based on the observer's experience of pupils of this age and the grade descriptors that we'll mention tomorrow. So what's the proof? Well, the proof is in the writing. Year 5 know and show a wide range of vocabulary for their age. And give me an example, because we need examples to justify and verify our outcomes in inspection. So the example here is it was used with great fluency in their descriptions of mythical beasts. So that's the specific example that has been picked up. And why am I seeing this? Well, that's drawn to the contributory factors. In this case, it reflects the recent school-wide initiative on creative writing. And those judgments arrived at by inspectors and the team as a whole need explaining by these contributory factors. For example, things such as the curriculum or the teaching or the contributory factor of the leadership management, including the governance of the school. Or it could be the contributory factor of the impact of school ethos and aims on what you're seeing, or the resourcing and facilities, which are really very good in that area, or just simply the attitudes of pupils and staff towards the work that they're doing. In our example, the school leadership, i.e. management and leadership, has implemented a school-wide initiative in creating writing, which is therefore curriculum. Therefore, there are two clear contributory factors for the excellence around pupils' writing skills. That is management and leadership and curriculum. There may be other things contributing too, but those two are clear from what's been written, and it's been written because what's been seen and heard.
And we need to think about how we express what we're seeing. Outcomes for pupils, you hope will be expected. Explain them if they're better or worse and try and say why. Distinguish between attainment and progress. Think of the 3 A's: ability, age, and aims. We need to understand pupils' individual starting points, plus the relationship to age expectations, plus the school aims. What should they attain? What do they actually attain? And so what does progress look like? And with this in mind, keep looking specially at all the different types of pupils you have in your school. Can you say something about the SEND pupils, about the EAL, about the more able, about the difference between boys and girls? Because we're interested in all the pupils and how they progress. And as Paul said earlier, not just your superstars. You need the 4 factors of headline judgment, proof, example, and contributory factors in your observation write-ups, because they will then feed the information into your SEF and they'll feed that to the inspectors. And once you've built up a bank of good evidence to add to your SEF, and this can take a year, by the way, then you need another leadership meeting where you could look at your findings against the ISI grade criteria, and we're going to look at those tomorrow. A note though, if your observers have all written progress was good, or pupils show good attainment for their age, then what grade are you going to conclude for your school? It has to be good, doesn't it? Because the adjectives we've used are good, and the evidence you produced says good. It can only be excellent if the evidence says it's excellent. Now, you can't get your leaders to fabricate this because otherwise inspectors will disprove it. But when you review your forms, the main grades are good, then you need to either check through the expectations of your observers, which could be wrong, a bit high perhaps, or look to improve pupil outcomes, possibly through enhancing one of those contributory factors. And this is why it's a long cyclical process. And the final questions on the SEF relate to how you met your last inspection's recommendations. Please don't neglect this area. Hopefully you've been working on those recommendations as part of all this over the last few years.
So I think as well as the SEF, you need to then take the next step, which is to understand the views of your stakeholders. Many schools take samples of views of parents and pupils, for example, within a year group or at a departmental level. And they often do a survey. It used to be a real headache when you had to analyse all the responses and turning the pages over by hand. However, now with Google or Microsoft Forms or SurveyMonkey, you can do that analysis really easily and have much of that done for you. If you don't know what questions to ask in those surveys, please, the parental pupil questionnaires are also available on the ISI website. I would just caution one thing to avoid questionnaire overload. Be aware that ISI will ask their questionnaire. If it's one every term, you have to understand that the parents may well not be responding as they should, and they may not be bringing things that you need to know to those surveys. So do get the number of them right. And do please plan to rectify any shortcomings that are highlighted. Be honest about these as far as is reasonable possible so that all staff can engage in making improvements. If you're a child or if you're a parent and you've raised a concern, they need to see something happens as a result of it, if it's improving the outcomes for them. So build those actions for student surveys into the development plan so you don't ignore them. And do put the development plan for the improvement and then check again to see if you've improved them. Do properly allocate the time, the personnel and the money to do whatever is needed in those areas that have been highlighted, particularly if it concerns those areas that we've covered in the inspection criteria. The production of the SEP is something we would recommend strongly. It's best done annually and it's best done as a team effort, although it's unlikely that everyone is involved in all of it. But someone should act as an editor who standardizes the tone and the content. In building it, you really get to know your school and the views of the stakeholders, and that gives you the chance to respond before the inspection team arrives. And finally, before we leave, we have some homework for you. We're not really allowed to give out official ISI documentation, but you have access to it. So please, will you get hold of a copy of the ISI document 1.8, which is the grade descriptors. We'll be looking at those in detail tomorrow. It's helpful if you've seen a set, and it will be helpful if you have tried to log on to the ISI website so that you can gain access as well to all of those documents we've referred to this morning. Please also bring along some more coloured highlighters. Have you got any questions from anybody? I see we're at about 12:01, which is a decent finish time because that's when we said we'd finish. Any questions?
So a link for tomorrow's session should just have arrived in your inbox anytime now. If it hasn't, drop me a line when we've finished, and I'll make sure you have that sent to you. But it should be there right now. So I hope you found that useful. We've looked at the building the SEF, and getting that preparation is absolutely key. If you want to be excellent, you have to know your school inside out. You have to know all 16 of those different criteria, what goes into each one, and therefore what kind of examples you're looking for to believe that your school is excellent in those areas. And so we'll look at that in more detail tomorrow. But if there's no further questions, can I say thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found that useful, and we'll meet around the same time again tomorrow.